Now, in today's episode, we are speaking about the future of the monetary system, this massive currency reset and currency devaluation. There will be many losers in this, but this is a wealth transfer where there is a great opportunity to win, and that's in real money. And so today, to discuss this subject, we have none other than David Morgan. David Morgan is one of the most well respected gold and silver researchers, mining stock analyst. Eric Sprott even said he's one of the two or three greatest silver analysts and most dependable in the world. And he's also someone who has been a huge mentor to me. David has the Morgan Report. There's a free newsletter to that right there down below. First gold and silver newsletter that I had ever subscribed to. Bought my first gold and silver mining stocks from the Morgan Report, actually. And there's a free newsletter to that right there down below. Want to encourage you to hit the like button on this video right over there to send this out into the YouTube universe. Give us your silver price predictions right there down below. Special shout out to our channel sponsor, which is Vizsla Silver. Thank you for being our mining stock sponsor. And I want to say hello to you, Mr. David.
Well, Jake, hope I live up to that introduction. Thanks for having me.
Hey, I always love talking to you. We've had so many conversations and so many interesting ones. And, what's really remarkable is you've been how long have you been investing in silver?
Oh, boy. I'd say 40 years, probably.
40 years. So you've been talking about these subjects for basically for 40 years, this currency reset, this currency devaluation. And for the most part, the media has, and many of the mainstream financial pundits have essentially ostracized people that have said infinite currency printing is not only bad, there's going to be ramifications of it. I think even Warren Buffett kind of called people like us kooks for a while. And just recently, he's essentially warned of inflation, said that prices are increasing on everything. And you're starting to see this flip. And I want to ask you, from a macro view, how do you view everything that's occurring right now? How does it fall in line with your years of research?
Well, in a word, it's a mess. I'm not a huge fan of Milton Friedman, although he did say at the New Orleans Gold Conference many years ago, I think it was in 1993, that silver is the monetary of the metal, not gold. That's almost a direct quote. But I know you didn't ask me that. So Milton Friedman has said that inflation is always a monetary phenomenon, which means pretty much what the Austrian school of economics believes, which is you cannot print forever. If you could, then obviously Zimbabwe would be the richest place on the planet, or Venezuela, or Turkey, or any of these places that have gone into a hyperinflationary collapse. Argentina does it about every 10 years. The reason that we've gone so far for so long is because, well, two reasons really. One is we have a special place in the monetary sphere, meaning the United States, because it's the reserve currency of the world. Almost all transactions are settled in the dollar, although that's changing. And secondly, it's the best one of all other currencies. For example, going back to Venezuela, Argentina, they'll take their local currency and exchange it for physical greenbacks because relative to their paper currency, it holds its value much better. So there's a huge bias to the US dollar as a reserve currency. But we've gotten to the point that I've talked about and actually thought it would happen sooner than it has. And so let me back up. So there were two reasons. The second reason, and when I figured it out, I promptly admitted my error, was in order to keep basically a Ponzi scheme going, you need more people to enter the game. And that's what happened in the early 2000s in a significant way with China. So when you added 1.4 billion people to the Keynesian model of banking with fractional reserve banking, certainly that model works for a while. I would be, incorrect to say that Keynesian economics doesn't work ever. If it didn't work ever, we wouldn't use it at all. So obviously it works. And of course, China had this huge industrial revolution from roughly 2000 till for the last 20 years, basically. But that's petering out as well. They've overextended themselves in debt. They have banking issues as well. They've given out too many loans. all the thing that goes with what I'll call free money or funny money. So now we're at that tipping point, Jake. We're at that point where enough people in the market realize this can't go on much longer. And now we don't know exactly how it'll unfold. If you go back to that movie of 1981 called Rollover, and one of the investment bankers is talking to one of the actors about he was set up in front of another bank that was failing to rescue it. It was a setup, really. And he says, look, you don't want to unstabilize the US dollar. I mean, it could happen if somebody moves too much money the wrong way, or moves it at the wrong time, or gets scared or spooks the market. And those things still hold true. Now, the market's so vast, and of course, the central banks are willing to basically print for whatever failure they do. But that, again, means that enough people are waking up that, oh, I see. Not only are they never going to pay their debt back, but anytime something's wrong, the too big to fails will be rewarded for their mistakes. And so the 2008 crisis, which really was the precursor for where we are right now, probably we would have been better off just to let the banks that should have fail. Yes, I know Lehman and some other bear did fail, but there were a lot more. I mean, AIG basically would have failed, but of course that would have taken down Buffett. So let's not do that. So they said, well, these banks are too big to fail. So they're playing favoritism. And again, it was absolutely rewarding a mistake. If you make a bad loan, you make a bad loan. If you make a bad loan, you should pay the price for having made a bad loan, which means you don't get paid back. So anyway, I'm probably laboring the point, Jake, but I want to make it crystal clear that we've run out of road. We can't kick the can anymore. All nation states and basically the big money, the money that moves trillions in the currency markets, they're aware of what's going on. And we just haven't seen that tipping point of that trigger event where somebody moves too much money one way or the other, or some event happens where a big bank fails or a multiple amount of banks fail. The problem with the banking system is they're all interconnected. And if one starts to fail, it could take others down, which is what we saw in 2008. So since we papered over the 2008 crisis, we made it substantially bigger. We didn't learn our lessons at all. So the next time, which I think we're going to enter soon, will be devastating. And as you said at the intro, there are ways to protect yourself. There are ways to come through it. But the next financial reset, which we're really in, will definitely change everybody's lives, no matter how much money they have.
So, where does central bank digital currencies fit into this reset? And reset is now a more popular word, right, than it was maybe, a year ago, right? And part of that's because of the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab's their commercials and stuff like that. And so it's more popularized, but I want to know, what does it really mean to you? What's the next stages of it? And how do central bank digital currencies fit into it? Because, if we're talking about media and storylines of things you've been talking about for, many, many years, now one of them playing out that's covered on pretty much all mainstream financial channels is China's central bank digital currency that they were experimenting with, that was programmable money that you get deposited and it can expire. And so how do central bank currencies fit into this, and what is the reset really?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, I've written about it in the premium service, which, as you said, you're a subscriber. Go back probably 6 months ago, I did the whole editorial on it, and I basically quoted Mark Carney when he was the president of the London Bank, and he said it at the Davos, or World Economic Forum. Now we usually refer to it, the United Nations, and in Jackson, Wyoming, which is where the Fed has their meetings. And what he said is that they want a unbacked central bank digital currency with MMT, modern money theory, no limit on how much they can print, and that it will be, again, unbacked, so there's no gold or silver tied to it. And they want all the banks to basically jump on board. He didn't say it'd be a global currency. He just indicated that they wanted, let's say the pound sterling and others to join in with their central bank digital currencies. So they're ignoring the problem. I think they're thinking, and this is what I wrote as opinion, is that they could take the bad debt, which is what the Fed's basically doing. I mean, the Fed is a vacuum cleaner to suck up all the paper that's worthless and take all that worthless paper and stick it on their balance sheet and then issue good paper, which is the treasury bills, all the treasury bills, notes, bonds. And so that's the most trusted paper in the world until it's not, which is where we're at. So you could take all the bad debt off the books, put it on the balance sheet. So with central bank digital currency, they have, in my opinion, the same idea is we'll take all these bad loans from third world countries that can't pay it back, and we'll just stick it over here. We'll give you a clean slate, join the one world currency or the nation state currency, and everything is good. Now, this proposal, which is best I can research and understand, will be enacted over the next few years, and it could fail. I mean, think about it, Jake. I'll give you my example, but I know you run a pretty powerful internet site as well. But just transitioning over from, and I own the server, but just transitioning over from a software program to an updated software program, we still had bugs. We had subscribers that were expired that, came alive as, paid members, and we had paid members that turned up expired, and just a couple of examples, but there were bugs, not tremendous, not devastating, but it took a couple of weeks to straighten this out. Can you imagine the banking system going to a central bank digital currency at one fell swoop? What that would look like, especially when we know how inept government is at almost any job. You're far better off in most cases to be in the private sector. So I fear what's coming ahead of us. These bankers are so arrogant and so elitist and have this attitude that they know what's best for everybody else, and they're forcing us into their system so they don't lose control, is arrogance beyond belief. But whether or not it'll work remains to be determined. In the meantime, and I know we'll get to this, there are measures that you can take at a personal level, family office level, money manager level, pension fund manager level that can mitigate the transition.
So let's talk a little bit about that. Silver and gold had a nice run after the lockdown sell-off that happened in 2020 in March. They had a nice run up into August, September. You even had Bank of America and these places even calling, saying $3,000 gold's coming, which was interesting to see all these banks now talking positively about it. Then we've had quite a long consolidation. As of today, on May 17th, filming this, silver's up almost 3%, reapproaching $30. Gold's back up above $18.50. What is your assessment on gold and silver, the inflation trade, and the reopening, quote unquote, sort of the world?
Well, technically, it's very bullish for both gold and silver. Gold's in a breakout mode. As a paid member that, I have the Morgan rule, and I'll just say it for your viewers. I set a level horizontally. Channel formations, I used to believe in those. They work, but the best one is horizontal. I don't have time to go into why. But you set a horizontal level, and when it breaks up through that level, you can go long if and only if it breaks that level and maintains it 3 days in a row on above average volume. So right now we're doing it in the silver market, we're doing it in the gold market, and all I want to see is some follow through the next couple of days. If that's the case, you might be buying silver at make up a number, 28.62 instead of 28.30 or whatever it is we're doing the interview. So you're paying a few pennies more, but you have a 80 to 85% probability that you're going higher. I looked at the HUI before we started recording, as you know, and I mean, it's right off the 200-day moving average, going straight up. It's right into the congestion area right now, which is very bullish. I mean, it will probably retrace or whatever, but I think everything's lining up for the metals. And I think the one thing that we don't talk about enough, and I'm biased because I am a member of, this cryptocurrency that's gold and silver backed, ag.lode.one, ag.lode.one, is the availability for people to buy silver and gold that are not in North America. If you're in Canada or you're in the US, buying silver and gold is so simple, off the internet or a coin shop in your town or the next town over. But if you are in Japan or you're in many other jurisdictions, it's almost impossible. Or if you can access it, the premiums are sky high. And I know they're sky high right now. I'm well aware of that fact. So when you get a digital platform where you can change whatever currency into physical metal and digitize it, that's a big, profound change, because what it does is it lets everybody access it. And the beauty of it is that you don't have certain restrictions that you have in the physical market. Yes, it's physically backed and you can take the physical, but there's a little bit of restrictions on that. In other words, if you have 27 grams of silver, you're not going to get that in the mail. You've got to get through a threshold of something like 20 coins or one roll of, let's say, silver maples or silver eagles or silver rounds or something like that. But back on point, you cannot be penalized for buying at 27 grams of silver or 27 grams of gold. Whereas if you go to a coin shop, you can't do that. You can't do that fractional basis. And usually, unless you spend $1,000 or more, you're restricted. I mean, you're going to pay a bigger premium, mailing costs or whatever. So I think it's the way of the future. It is an adjunct to the way the market works right now. I didn't throw all of my silver into this project. I did a fair amount because I believe in it. I believe it is the future, but I'm pretty conservative, Jake, as you know. You've dealt with me personally on the phone a few times, and you might comment on that. But that's, I think, where you get access that you don't have now. So, and especially if, and I'm working on this for the project, where we access silver particularly, but gold as well, direct ship from the refiner to us. So instead of going to the LBMA, for example, it comes into the load project, and maybe a silver mine, a refiner, the electronic waste company that you're so familiar with, that's in the Morgan report. Well, you've pretty much got that tied up, although the flow rate there is very minimal. It is flowing and it will continue to, and it will grow over time. So I'm trying to get at least 3 or 4 sources where we, the project, are able to acquire it, because as things tighten up more and more and the price continues to rise, the ability to get physical, I believe, will be more and more difficult to obtain.
So, talking about that price rise, what is it that you need to see? There's been people calling for silver to head to 50 this year. There's other people that say it's not going anywhere until there's another market crash and there's fear back in the market. What do you need to see for you to say that this rally is on the move to reapproaching the all-time highs? Does it have to close and hold above 30 for those 3 days? What needs to occur? What are you looking at?
Well, everything is based on volume. So what I need to see is a massive amount of new buyers. And we're seeing, fairly, I won't say massive, but a substantial amount of new buyers since about February, when the Wall Street silver crowd showed up. I mean, silver never asked, are you buying an industrial bar? Or are you buying, a retail 100-ounce bar or whatever? Silver. Now, of course, there are some, caveats to that, and I don't know if I should go into them or not. But I mean, the silver market's based on the 1,000-ounce bar market, not the 100-ounce bar retail market. Nonetheless, any silver that's taken off into physical possession helps the cause, so to speak, meaning that there aren't any games that can be played with it. They can't hypothecate it or rehypothecate it or write an option and swap it or lend it or all the stuff that happens in these markets. So the amount of volume that we saw in February, where we saw like 100 million ounces trade in a matter of a few trading sessions was really huge. In fact, it triggered a couple of responses from two of the silver ETFs, the largest in the world, the SLV, basically said that to the effect that we're concerned about the amount of physical silver to back our stock, because an SLV is a stock certificate. If you buy the SLV, you get a piece of paper. It's a stock. It's not a piece of metal. And then there was Aberdeen Trust, I believe, is the other one, and they were talking pretty negatively about a product that they sell. And what this annoys me, Jake, and I like your comment online. I mean, Aberdeen Trust basically said these no good people are buying silver and causing congestion in the market. Well, they're supposed to be neutral. They're supposed to put up an ETF for anyone that wants to buy the metal. They should be totally neutral. They shouldn't have an opinion on if there's too much buying pressure or not. But basically, that's what they said in their when they adjusted their prospectus.
So let's talk a little bit about that. There are people that say it's so the the price so much so does not reflect the value that it should, that this game can go on forever. And you sent me an article about talking down the price, and I wonder, do you think right now is different because we've been able to maintain a strong volume? Where do you think the price of silver can go this year?
Well, I've already said in the report, as you know, 40. I think we'll see something close to it. It might get to 38. I doubt we'll see 50 this year, but who knows as things start to unravel further. Really, the the deal with the silver market, which again is a bunch of derivatives. I mean, the silver market is basically a paper market. And occasionally someone stands for delivery and takes delivery. And most of the time they take delivery, all they do is retag the silver pile in the warehouse. So they put a new tag on it. They take the JP Morgan tag off of it and they put in HSBC on it. But occasionally some does actually come off of the COMEX and gets delivered somewhere. But it's not the primary delivery vehicle. It's not set up to be that. It's set up to be, again, a derivatives market based on paper. So what happens? Well, the truth of the matter is, and I've tried to emphasize this the last several years, is all markets move at the margin, which means if I stand for delivery and I get my silver bar, that might be the last one they have that month that they could hand out. But as long as that demand is met, they're covering themselves because it's basically on a fractional reserve system. In other words, they know that less than 1% of all the contracts out there ever get cashed out for the commodity. That's true in most of the markets: corn, wheat, soybean oil, you name it. So this is the advantage that the shorts have, is they know that they can basically leverage it at 100 to 1 and not be called out. But that only lasts until it doesn't. In fact, I just got a email from one of my listeners, and he stood for delivery. He sent me the notice from the exchange, and they were making him cast settle, which is in their contract. And when you sign up for a futures account, even if you don't read it, you signed it. And it basically says they could cast settle. And so it wasn't a large amount, Jake, but they said, we're paying you cash, we're not delivering the silver, even though that's what he wanted. And is it legal? Yes. And is it a default? Technically, it's not a default because you signed a contract that says I'll take fiat for it. But that's not why people buy silver. They buy silver because they are anti-fiat, at least with some of their portfolio. And they know that silver can't be produced. I thought of this, and I may be going way out on a tangent, so you can reel me back in. But I looked at the amount of smartphones bought in the world last year. It was 1.4 billion. Now, would you buy a cell phone or a smartphone for $30?
Well, what do you think?
I say yes. I mean, I don't know what you pay, but I usually pay, even with the discount, somewhere around $750 or something for a new, smartphone. But if you took an ounce of silver, that's roughly, today 28, and add the premium, that's up to 35, 36. Would I trade an ounce of silver for a cell phone? Well, I certainly trade, 30 bucks in fiat for a cell phone, which is what the silver value is. I would say the value, the silver price is. But if everyone used that as their means of payment, you first of all wouldn't have enough silver on an annual basis to do it. And secondly, I think it illustrates the point, and here's what I'm trying to convey, is how undervalued silver is. Because, the price of silver is not anything close to what the value is. And the value is probably closer to what, that cell phone or smartphone actually sells for. But no one trades in silver except a few of us nut jobs. But if you go back 100 years, if you didn't have silver, you didn't have money. Think about that. If you didn't have silver in your pocket or silver in your bank account, you didn't have money at all. But now we transition from a silver standard or a bimetallic standard into this fiat fiasco frenzy. And the bankers keep telling us everything's fine, just look the other way, we have it under control, do as we say, we know what's best for you. And then, of course, and we haven't touched on this too much, is at the end of all these great inflations, there's always comes to the fore a competing currency. In most cases, it's been the precious metals. In this case, it's been the precious metals, which have taken a back seat primarily to the cryptocurrencies. So, I mean, you've got a coin that's called a doggy coin. I don't call it Doge, I call it dog, a dog e coin. And that dog e coin is supposedly a joke. And I think it's the sixth or seventh highest market cap crypto out there. So this is the insanity. There's a book out, and I'll give it back to you, Jake, called Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowns by Mackay. And it is an illustration of all kinds of bubbles that have taken place in the financial markets throughout history. The people basically lose their minds temporarily. Now, I'm neutral on crypto. I do have some. I put them in the report, as you know, Jake. You get it. There's some that I think are probably stalwarts that will continue on the blockchain path. And I'm not against the blockchain. But some of these coins that there's a name for are here today, gone tomorrow. I do believe there'll be a great shaking out, similar to what happened in the tech wreck in 2000, where anything with the .com, you had mypet.com or, all these names, and people getting these huge valuations for basically an idea and registration cert into the SEC. And I think there's going to be an adjustment through the crypto world. I do think that the crypto world will remain. So I don't see that gold and the cryptos have to be a competitor. I see them as being an adjunct to each other. I mean, the best DeFi, decentralized finance, is basically coins in your pocket that are recognized anywhere in the world that have lasted or had value for thousands of years. I mean, no crypto can make that statement. So I'll hand it back to you. Hopefully, give me feedback on the buying a smartphone for an ounce of silver. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, if you can easily attain a piece of paper as opposed to use a coin, then I think I'm right there. I'm right there with you. And my question with regards to that then is, when you're talking about essentially trading or basing the value of something based off of your silver, there's a lot of people that have been in this industry for a while, or influencers in this industry, or what have you, and many of them are only invested in mining stocks, and that's their play. And I'm sure you know many of them. You're someone who is truly I like to think of you also as like a philosopher. You're someone who owns a lot of physical metals, a lot of physical silver, and it's very important to you. And I wonder, is there a point at which you will start to sell your silver, and at what point would it be? Like, let's say, is there a point at which you buy anything with it, or is it just gone forever? It's your own mini black hole that you're pulling out of the system. How do you view that? And is there a price at which you would sell?
There's not a price, there's a value. So if, 3 monster boxes buys a average suburban home in America, then its value is about correct. So that's what you have to do. You have to put it up against something else, like what's the value of the DJI versus 1,000 ounces of silver, or what's the value of a business or anything else. So putting a paper price on it is, what I'm most often asked, but really you have to do it. And Mike Maloney teaches this as well. You really want to look at what is the value. So, if it took 100 monster boxes to buy a Lamborghini, and I don't know if that would cover it or not, making the numbers up, today, but 5 years from now, it takes 1/10 that much silver. Well, now you see that silver's value has increased very much against, a well-known sports car. So that's what you look for. You look for what can you do. My personal philosophy is the three ways that you put in legacy wealth, and this, Jake, are land, gold, and fine art. Fine art's way out of my league. I'm not that wealthy, and I don't have a lot of interest in it. But gold, silver, and land. So if we get to the point where now it would take my life savings of silver to buy a section of land in rural Washington, would I make that trade? The answer is no. I think that land is very overvalued relative to what silver's value is. Silver is very undervalued to it. But let's go out in the future 10 years, and that section of land in the great Northwest becomes 1/10 that amount. Then obviously I'd probably consider making that transaction. So waiting for a comparison, comparative value is better than trying to find a paper price that's suitable.
So essentially, seeing those ratios shift is basically another way to quantify real life devaluation of currency. And we seem to be in a more active stage of that, where even the news is talking about inflation. And like I said, Warren Buffett, you're having a lot of these big guys that before, maybe said everything was fine, are now saying, I don't know if everything's going to be fine. And I wonder how you think this plays itself out, because we still have an incredible amount of people that are unemployed. More importantly, people that are willingly remaining unemployed because they make more off unemployment than they do at their work. For instance, my favorite restaurant here in town where I live, I go in for takeout. I used to go sit down, real nice restaurant, but a real nice expensive restaurant, you don't want to use plastic cups and plastic forks, and that's what they've been using since the lockdowns. And I said to the manager, when are you guys gonna get these? I love to sit down and have a nice dinner here at the restaurant. And he said, in the next week or two, we're just getting that all situated. Well, another month or two went by, and I said, did you get that solved yet? And he said no. And I made a joke. I said, too much stimulus money, or what's going on? And I kind of laughed. And he said, no, really, that's actually, we can't get anyone to get the dishwasher jobs. And that's why we haven't been able to transition off them. And I said, oh, I thought you guys did it because you were being, following sanitary rules by the state government. And he said, no, we can't. No one will take the job. And so you've got this really bizarre place where not only how are people becoming addicted to the money, but then there's many people that legitimately they need it. They actually were forced out of their job. They actually did get their business shut down through police force. And there's an incredible amount of people not paying their rent, not paying their mortgage. They're talking about increasing more and more rounds of these relief payments and these infrastructure bills. Do you think that they just start reeling these things off and we move through a period of greater and greater inflation? How do you view this unfolding here in 2021?
There's, only a few outcomes. And the one that's most likely is for governments to continue to print. Then they can absolve their debt because the currency becomes worth less and then worthless. So the amount that they owe, they can just, they can make big amounts of purchases. And again, like we talked about earlier, they can move some of these non-performing assets into a certain category and then just, magically make them disappear. I mean, that is possible with the banking system as it exists. But I think the more central planning there is, the more you mess with the complex system, the more it has potential to break and the worse the repercussions. So the more people that are on UBI and doing because they need it, I'm not going to say no one needs it, but the more you meddle with the free market, the worse the outcomes are. And that's what we're seeing. I mean, again, it started years ago, but 2008 again is probably, I think we'll go back in financial history as that point in time where scholars will look back and say, what if? What if the free market actually worked, that the right to succeed is the right to fail? And all these banks were over leveraged and made bad loans failed. And the banking system readjusted assets that they had on the books at, $1 were selling at 20 cents and 10 cents and 5 cents. And the market cleared. And once the market cleared, maybe we'd have hit a place of sanity where we know the market's consciousness knows more than any central planner. Now, it would have been very, very devastating to have that happen. I mean, it would have definitely been, I'd say, a depression. The problem is we've papered it over, as I talked about earlier. So the next one's going to be even more devastating. And again, we're in it right now. A lot of people that are unwilling to work because they're getting, UBI, or they're getting paid more in unemployment than they would to be a dishwasher. And that's pervasive. I mean, it's really, I've talked, most of the people that subscribe are small business owners like yourself. So most of my, paid database is people that have earned it and done it the hard way and have had all the responsibility of meeting a payroll and having months that were losses and months that weren't and all that stuff. So they're the real deal. And so many of them have said just what you said to me, that they can't find people to fill these jobs. So there's going to be a reset, and a reset is going to devastate a lot of people. And again, what the bankers plan on doing and what actually materializes remains to be determined. Will cryptos save us? I don't know. I kind of doubt it. Will gold and silver save us? I would say more so financially than almost anything else I can name. But as I've said before, and this bears stressing, one, you can't eat it. So the best commodities you can have, especially if you're on a low budget, would be to buy food or have access to clean water or have a skill set or join a community garden or any of those type of things, because ultimately you want to look at the very, very basics. Financially, I think you'll be able to move into the metals and do well, maybe not initially, but probably. It's hard to determine, and it will vary. I mean, if you're in Venezuela and you had no food but you had silver, for a lot of months you could buy food with silver, not with the currency. So is it a solution for every case? No, it isn't. But financially, I think it's one of the best. It's proven to be that in years past, and I think it'll continue to do so in the future. And I think the bridge is going to these digital backed cryptos that are associated with gold and silver. And there's several of them. And I think that may be the precursor to the run to gold. It's easy to access on your phone, and you can buy silver by the gram or gold by the grain.
Explain to me what the reset is.
It's a taking down of the old way of doing the monetary transactions to a new one. The reset is resetting the way we do all monetary transactions.
And what's on the other side of it? What is that? What does it look like?
Well, it could be a chaos. I mean, as we talked about earlier, based on my example of my own server and changing the software caused all kinds of problems. So, for the United States Fed to come out with a Fed coin and everybody's bank account will transition, and you get 1/10 of your bank account into X amount of Fed coins. It all sounds really good, but to transition the technology without any flaws is a fool's errand. It's not going to happen. So they'll run a parallel system if they're smart, which means you can, use currency up until a certain point in time. Maybe they'll outlaw, currency, sort of a cashless society. It's going to be a tough job for them, but that's what it means. A reset means you have a completely different way of doing monetary transactions. China's the leader. I mean, China basically is a cashless society for 1/3 of their population. Any big city in China, cash is worthless. You have to do it off your phone with Tencent or WePay or whatever. You can't. Cash is useless, even in farmers markets in some of those places. So that's the model that the bankers want to go to. And basically, China is the case study to how to implement it and how to make it come out.
How close do you think they are to implementing something like that? And would they need could they implement it without a crisis? A lot of times as things are implemented by governments throughout history, they're implemented during a period of crisis. Um, would there need to be a problem reaction solution, or does the problem already exist, which is a lot of people need money, therefore let's use these things so we can make sure people are getting their relief?
Yeah, I think it already exists. I mean, a lot of these payments were done electronically. Not everyone got a physical check to cash. So it just went in their bank account. There's a lot of auto pay and all this stuff is done electronically. All I'm saying is that as well as that works, to transition to the reset where you just have, and right now you just have digits. So I think there will be some, bugs in the system, but like you asked, would it take place and could it, go smoothly? Or that's how I heard your question. The answer is possible, but doubtful. But there's no doubt in my mind that this is what they're striving for. And again, China is a perfect example. And again, it goes back to the social credit score, which they really are implementing in North America. They just don't use those terms. But it's not your credit score, it's your social score. You either obey Big Brother or you don't. And the more you obey Big Brother, the more access you have to whatever it is you want, hotels, planes, vacations, restaurants, or whatever. But if you have been a bad person, you will get demoted. And even if you have a lot of money, it won't do you any good because your social credit score says you can't go on this airplane. You can only travel by train from now on.
And that's something that a lot of people have talked about for a very long time. And um, now you're starting to see, we do know China has this type of social credit score system, and you don't need to take much to infer that you might be able to do a similar thing with the social credit score system and a central bank digital currency, and kind of blending them together. So in an event like that, is this if this is the way we're moving, then what you do is you take whatever wealth you have as it's coming in, your savings, your surplus, and that's when you exit the system. And that's the philosophical reason behind owning gold and silver right now.
Well, for some, yes. I mean, for some, it's the true definition of an anarchist, which most people have no conception what the real definition is. But basically, it's voluntarism. And I mean, you voluntarily do with your currency what you want. And that means you buy physical metal because you believe that there is a place for it as you make the transition. Now, you might be in very small company, maybe at the top of the market, only 3% of the people believe the same thing you do. But that 3% would be your Gulch. Those would be the innovators that mostly would be. I mean, not in every case, but a lot of the people that made that transition with physical metal would be more independently thinking. They would be philosophically bent for there is no free lunch. I'm not dependent on the government. I'm dependent on my own ability to make my own way, especially in a community that serves each other, and all these things that were basically fundamental beliefs, basically in the beginning of the republic, but have been obfuscated for years. And now we're at a point with the cancel culture where you've got to think this way or else you're canceled or you're censored.
What do you think the future of America is?
Depends. We haven't made the final decision. We are on the road to ruin. We're on the road to basically slavery. That's pretty clear what the trend is. Whether that trend can be broken or not remains to be determined. Most people that are, let's say, inundated with the mainstream news don't really see it. They look at it as something that's just the normal course of political theory or the political class moving in a certain direction. But anybody that studied history and has a modicum of reality to what these things actually mean for the populace, it's very, very dark. So there will be some resistance, I think probably more, but it's really hard at this point, Jake, for me to make a determination which way it'll go. I mean, the old adage, freedom isn't free, is a true statement. The old adage that freedom requires constant vigilance is true. The idea that there are principles that are worth, our sacred fortune, as the founder said, our lives are sacred fortunes. The idea being that without freedom, you have nothing. If you go back to that little movie clip I did in my earlier presentations with William Wallace talking about, in front of the big group. And the group says, we're not going to fight these guys. They're bigger than us. They got more weapons. And he says, you can run, but would you trade that one day for the ability to have freedom? And this is a metaphor for where we probably stand. And most people might think I'm being over dramatic or I don't understand what the government wants for us or any of that horseshit. Because it's not true. It's very clear what the government wants. And you probably listen to some of my podcasts. I did one recently about politics doesn't matter. And what I pointed out, left, right, or in between, politics is force. The political class forces you to do something you wouldn't voluntarily do. And that is what all governments do. So it doesn't matter what stripe it is, if it's fascism, corporatism, communism, democracy, a monarchy, doesn't matter. They are a means of force. And this is what most people just can't get their heads around. That, I'm free, I can drive down and go to my restaurant and do a takeout. I can't use utensils or whatever. Well, that's like, which dress do you, or, which house do you want, the yellow one or the red one? I mean, you think, you're programmed to believe you have a choice or believe you have freedom. There's nothing more important for the controllers to do than to make you believe that you're free when you're in actuality you're not. And of course, they've done a great job of that. And, if I get into the mind control thing, I'll be really looked at as a kook. But there is the ability to use propaganda, which is used constantly. And propaganda does work. It wouldn't be doing it if it didn't work. So a lot of what you think, hear, and say is just nonsense. But if people can't critically think or know logic, they'll fall for it because they're emotionally controlled. I think part of this whole thing with the smartphone is to get the human species set up where they're basically an emotional machine that the powers that be can run through different algorithms to make you feel good or feel bad. And so you make all your decisions on how you feel rather than using reason, critical thinking, logic to determine if it's good or if it's bad, if it's right or if it's wrong. The moral decay is very clear. And the moral decay is what happens at the end of all these great empires. You see, as it is in that movie, the Four Horsemen film, chefs become idolized, sports figures become idolized. All these things, I wouldn't say that don't have meaning, but their meaning is given a priority that they don't really need. But at the time, it looks like we're peaking, and we've probably peaked already. The hardest thing to do in a market, Jake, as you know, is to pick a top. I've been pretty good at it so far. Hopefully I'll get the next one. But the idea is, look at how wonderful it is. Look at all this stuff. Look at all the production. And to say that's it, it's not going any higher than that, really takes guts, because the information is saying it can only get better. Look at how high it is. It's only going higher. And the call top, when it looks like it couldn't be any better, it's only going to go up. So a tough call to make, but I've made it. I think we've peaked. I think the Western culture has peaked. I think the government power, in a way, has peaked, even though that sounds crazy with the amount of control that's going on. But we haven't really seen the full resistance yet. So 2 months from now, we might be doing another interview, Jake. And he said, geez, David, you nailed it. Nailed what? Look at all the resistance there is to this mandate that the political class has put out the resistance is getting bigger and bigger, and this state dropped out, and that state dropped out, and this city dropped out, and this group formed, Free America or whatever. So it's not over yet. I wouldn't give up hope, but I think you need to know what principles are and adhere to them. If you don't know what you're all about, then it's very easy to be swayed by others. And most people that think they think, all they're doing is regurgitating something they've seen on social media, which is rather pathetic, but that's our society today.
Earl Nightingale used to say that 1% of people think, 2% of people think they think, and 97% of people would rather die than think. And it felt very true when you said, at the core, you have to realize who you are. And, you and I have had conversations off air about where I want to live and what I might be doing. And it's made me really question, everything that America was. It was built by people that didn't want to be a part of big government and big banks, and they went in, they built this system that was different, and now we're at the literal exact opposite of that. And so it's made me philosophically think about that, where the future of it may go, and more importantly, why we don't grasp what's happening. And you hit the nail on the head with the brainwashing. And I think that self-realization is like the most important. That's the only way you can ever actualize your own potential, but it's the only way you can ever even express your own sovereignty. And you talked about knowing what you're all about. Would you agree with me that the way that, if there is to be a massive shift towards less parasitic government, less central controlling, less central planning, and more freedom and more sovereignty, that it's essentially, it almost becomes kind of a spiritual thing, in a more understanding more of who you are, what your own constitution are, what your own thoughts are, what you're all about, as opposed to kind of the opposite that we have today.
Absolutely. I mean, the whole idea is, what will you sacrifice for freedom? There's nothing more cherished. And that's why America was kind of the leading beacon for the quote unquote free world for so many years, because they truly had it, at least in the beginning. And it just, slowly drifted away, as you said, and we're at the opposite now, as you said. But no, it's all about the people that understand the principles and are willing to fight for them. If you go to the Revolutionary War, I think it was only 3 or 4%. Most of the people were sitting in their homes or the bars or, the restaurants and saying, oh, well, we'll just do what the king wants. But it was that few that stirred the imagination of a lot of them to go ahead and pick up and say, no, we don't want to live like that. I don't want to be licking the boots of my master. I'd rather be a free man. And that's, again, pointing out that you don't need a vast majority. You just need an idea whose time has come. And the idea is that all of this censorship that's taking place has gone into the free market. You've got Rumble and BitChute, and I don't know them all. I'm on Library. I never tell anybody that, but it's called Odyssey and Library. All of my 20 years of work or 22 years of work is already over on Library, because I think there's a reason I haven't been shut off of YouTube yet, and that's because of the way I set it up. But I could be wrong. But I'm shadow banned. I mean, if you look at my subscriber base on YouTube, it's like 35,000. I mean, there's people that have come out 10 years after me and get 120,000. But then I'll do an interview with Stansberry Research, and it'll be 175,000 views. How does that work? So. And I'm not whining, I'm not complaining, I'm just stating numbers. I'm just telling you what the numbers are.
So speaking of those numbers and an idea that time has come to do, one of the ideas that you've discussed is currency devaluation that manifests itself as inflation for consumers and for everyday people. And now that we're beginning to see that, you had Warren Buffett say recently about that. I thought that was interesting. I mean, as someone that, what do you make of that? And some of these other big, whether it's big media or big financial people now kind of saying, hey, we're going to get big inflation. Is it that it's so undeniably obvious that they want to state it, so when it happens, it doesn't look bad, or what do you make of that? And specifically Buffett kind of talking about these things that he seems to have turned his shoulder to. Obviously, someone who benefited greatly from the system, but someone who's aware of the consequences of it. With his Howard, or with his father Howard, that you've discussed as well. What do you make of that?
I think you hit it. I think it has to do with being out in front of the curve, so to speak, and saying, like, I acknowledged it in our last Berkshire Hathaway annual meeting. I stood up and Charlie Munger added some comments, and we're having inflation and we're worried about it. We're seeing it in steel. I listened to the speech. And what's interesting, and this is going back, I digress, but I don't have the report anymore. But years ago, when I started the speaking circuit, I had a handout called Buffett and the Silver Market. And in that pamphlet, or that small booklet, I talked about Howard Buffett being a honest money advocate as a senator, and how different his son Warren was or is. And yet no one, anyone that knows Buffett's take on gold is, why bury, why dig it out of the ground and bury it in a vault? It's useless and all this stuff. But no one ever questions him on why he's been in the silver market in size so many times. It just never seems to come up from the mainstream press. And there is a reason for it, but I won't go into it. It's conjecture. I can't prove it. I never spoke with Warren Buffett. The annual meeting that they had at after he made the 130 million ounce purchase, one of my subscribers wrote to me and said, "Were you at the meeting?" Because I guess someone stood up and basically, according to my subscribers, sounded like me questioning in the forum all these questions about the silver market, and it wasn't me, but it was very interesting, I guess, at that time.
So you got to tell us your personal opinion. So is it that that it's too delicate of an industry for some of these big financial players to be involved in, and they're supposed to just kind of stay in the mainstream stock realm, or what?
Yeah, I mean, basically, you said it again, but I'll give more detail. I mean, when Buffett bought basically 25% of the physical silver supply, and almost all of it came off the COMEX, which you'd never be able to do now. He reported it in the annual report, and yet the word silver never showed up in the annual report. What? It was under miscellaneous, because in a big conglomerate like that, as long as that an investment, could be any investment, could be a restaurant change, it could be, balloons, but any investment that's under 2% of the total holdings of the company don't have to be disclosed. So I looked at the annual report and it was under miscellaneous. So I took the dollar value, or the price, and multiplied it by 130 million ounces. And lo and behold, that's how he reported it, as a miscellaneous investment. So what that tells you, and this is the more important part, is that even Buffett, with a less than 2% exposure to silver, really can't help him. He's actually too big to fail. In other words, with silver going up, it'd have to go up in price terms or in value terms substantially to protect him if, let's say, the stock market fell by 70 or 80%. It would help. But that shows you how small the silver market is, and answers the question, or you already gave the answer, though. Are these guys too big? I'll add on to one more. I was at a hedge fund conference in London at one time, very early fact. And in fact, the guy was saying, well, he manages too much money to put in the silver market, because he has so much money to manage that he just basically cornered the silver market if he put in a certain percentage in the silver. And so that's the problem. So I think that there'll be a run to silver. It'll be mostly by the populace. There'll be some pension funds. There'll be some money managers. There'll be some insurance companies. But most of them will be people of principle that can think outside the box and see what's really coming and are willing to take it as a hedge. But I think that's why silver will far outperform gold, is because it's a smaller market and it has more upside potential. And then going back to the illustration of, is the value of silver correct when 1 ounce buys a smartphone? I don't think it's correct. I think maybe the value is a good trade. Maybe an ounce of silver should be the cost of a smartphone. Maybe it is worth $780. I'm not saying it is. What I'm trying to point out is, as I said earlier, you got to get a ratio. What does that silver buy? If that 1 ounce buys a cell phone, now maybe silver is fairly priced. If that ounce of silver buys uh, a weekend in a high-end resort, maybe it's fairly valued.
If you were my age right now, you knew everything that you knew, and everything that was happening in the world was happening right now today. What would you be doing? What would you be focusing on? What would you be doing financially? How would you be directing your time and energy?
Well, you've heard me say it before, Jake. I mean, the number one thing I've taught my daughters is to be a lifelong learner. Question everything, no matter who says it, what their opinion is, how published an author they are. Saw it on YouTube. Question everything. What's in print, video, audio, or written down doesn't make it correct. So have that bias. You don't have to be a super skeptic, but you should be a skeptic. I think the number two thing is look at what serves you best from a comfort perspective. I mean, I've advocated, up to 20% in the metals. And as you know, being a member that, I have that PDF on how to use the Morgan report. And what I advocate is everybody have physical metal. And after that's accomplished, then you put like 70% of what remains in the top tier cash rich unhedged mining companies, which are primarily royalty companies. And then you go into the mid tier, and the speculation portfolio is basically money you can afford to lose. I think I'd be looking for maybe legacy stocks in silver. I mean, that one that's I think is as good as MAG that very few talk about because it's just they don't advertise at all. I think that would be a legacy stock that maybe, at some point in the future, your family would look back on it and go, God, I'm so glad Dad bought 100,000 shares and it was only 29 cents or whatever. But you want to balance it. Nature preaches balance. You don't need to go overboard. So I think spiritually, we haven't talked that much about it. I think that's the real war. It's boiled down very simply to good and evil. I think there's very little doubt in most people that can think on their own without being told what to think, that we have the evil empire versus everybody else. And the evil empire is basically on a global basis. I mean, all of this thing with the illness, all governments are in cahoots. Well, we're not supposed to get along with the CCP, or we're not supposed to get along with this ideology, but hey, we're all in bed together when it comes to the illness. Hey, we lock down everybody. So you really got to question everything. You really got to look deep. You can't take anything at surface value. Most things are deeper than the surface. So I've been that way most of my life. And do I get it right or wrong? Both. I'm human. I make mistakes. I correct them when I, learn, get more data, or realize that was a bad presupposition or whatever. But that's part of the learning process, which, of course, as I advocate, is one of the best things. So I think you got to be spiritually fit, especially for what's coming up with the reset. I'd say that's number one. Number two is to be a lifelong learner. And number three is to prepare. And that's different for everybody. In my own case, I'm a bit of a prepper. I have some food put back. I'm on a well. I'm in the country. I chose that over 2 decades ago because I've seen this coming for a very long time. And here we are. Does this absolve me from any change in lifestyle? No, not at all. I fully expect that my lifestyle will deteriorate over the next several years just because certain goods and services will be gone. They just won't be available. Certain maybe high-end products, like let's just make one up. Let's say a high-end confectioner's chocolate or something. They may be out of business. So you're just, no matter how much money you have, it just doesn't exist anymore. And that'll be across the board. Of course, there is this savior called technology. And some of the, let's say, very studied and rather smart individuals believe that technology will save us no matter what. I disagree. And the reason I do is because I am probably more technology based than any of them because I have an aeronautical engineering degree, and I'm not trying to brag. It's just part of my learning experience. So the one thing about engineering is there's no nonsense in the language whatsoever at all, which means if I do the blueprints for a Boeing 737, I can build it in Swahili, Russia, or Seattle, Washington, it'll come out exactly the way it was designed. That's a language that is not achievable in our normal human experience. It's that exact. There's a spec on every nut, bolt, rivet, piece of metal, glass, you name it. So you're going to get the same product over and over again because, again, of the exact communication. But we have such a poor communication in our normal sphere of lives, it doesn't hit. So back to technology, the idea that we'll just go solar. I'm doing a series that's not going to be near as great as my good friend Mike Maloney with the Hidden Secrets of Money, but we're going to do a series on myths in the silver market. And some of these myths I'll bring forward, and hopefully we're going to do them animated. I don't really want my voice on them, but the one myth, I just did it rough form, is, let's go solar. So if you look at the amount of homes in America and how many panels it takes to put a home on full solar, and then you take the amount of silver that it takes to put those 30 solar panels up, and you multiply it by the number of households, what you find is you run out of silver pretty quick. And that's only 4% of the world's population. And that's only for residential. I'm not counting commercial. So if you take the commercial side of America that needs power, all the office buildings, all the schools, all the churches, all the grocery stores, everything else that's a commercial activity, gas stations, all that stuff, it takes about 1.5 times more power or more electricity than the residential side does. So at present technology, you couldn't go solar and power the world. It's impossible. Now, I want to be very clear because this is the biggest mistake that Jerome Smith made, that was the silver guru back in the late 70s, 1980s. And he made an assumption or presupposition on the mining activity, not seeing a breakthrough in technology that would bring a lot more silver to the surface. So he made that error. So I don't want to make the same mistake. Could we get solar panels 100 times more efficient than they are now? And maybe we could power the planets with solar. I won't rule it out. I doubt it. But so there's that. This is, again, I'm not trying to put any of my friends and colleagues and peers down. I have to laugh in a way because technology. Some of these guys run IT companies and, that. And I'm not saying I'm smarter than anybody at all. All I did was use logic. Well, is it logical you can power the planet with solar? I use basic arithmetic. Well, how much silver does it take to make a solar panel? And how many would you have to make? And is there enough silver to do it? So there's a myth for you, Jake. Maybe it's a good place to end the show.
Yeah, I think it's a good myth to have play out here this decade as we get quote unquote infrastructure to save all of us from what is taking place and the effect that has on silver. So I want to encourage everyone to hit the like button on this video on either side to send it out into the YouTube universe so more people see it. Comment down below, David Rules right there down below. Comment down below, David Rules. If you haven't yet, be sure to get the free newsletter for the Morgan Report, which I will link in the description right there down below. And just want to say thank you so much for joining today, David.
Jake, it's always fun to be with you. Thanks.